Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Under a Conservative government, common sense change will be the approach that we take in British Columbia.
Days before BC heads to the polls, the Conservatives share a platform prioritizing affordability and safety. Plus, a Vancouver Compassion Club files a charter challenge.
Without the club, overdoses go up. Without the club, people don't have access to a reliable supply of drugs.
Saying their rights were violated when they were shut down and arrested. And as Canada-India relations come under more strain, members of the pro-Khalistan movement say they're fearful.
The RCMP and the Canadian government to make sure that these type of criminal activities are not taking place against Canadian citizens on Canadian soil.
The fallout from explosive allegations linking the Indian government to violence in Canada.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Ghoussoub. Thanks for joining us. BC Conservative Party leader John Rustad has announced his party's election platform with just 4 days left until voting day on Saturday. As Katie DeRosa reports, critics say the financial details of that plan are still murky.
When we look at British Columbia, this is no better place, I think, to unveil our platform.
On day 25 of a 28-day election campaign, BC Conservative leader John Rustad released his party's long-awaited platform in Vancouver.
Enough of a province that's run by ideology, that's run by the NDP.
It includes $2.3 billion in additional spending over 2 years, which will bring the current $9 billion deficit to more than $11 billion by 2026-27. However, that does not take into account an additional $4 billion a year in tax cuts promised by Rustad. That includes cutting the carbon tax, which would cost the government $3 billion a year, the Rustad rebate for homeowners and renters, which would cost the government $900 million in 2026, and a cut to small business taxes, which would cost an estimated $150 million a year. The NDP's Nikki Sharma criticized Rustad for waiting until the 11th hour to release a costed platform.
Finally does it 96 hours before the election is over and has no new spending on healthcare.
The Conservative platform does not include a price tag for major capital promises, including a new children's hospital in Surrey, a new SkyTrain to Surrey Newton, and a replacement for the Iron Workers Memorial Bridge and George Massey Tunnel.
It really seems like the Conservative Party threw everything in the kitchen sink into this. Everything they could possibly think of went into this platform, except how to pay for it all.
As far as fiscal responsibility goes, the grade would be an A for the BC Green Party, a C for the BC NDP, and a D for the BC Conservatives.
Rustad says a BC Conservative government would spur the economy, which would help balance the budget by their second term. The platform promises not to cut healthcare spending, despite warnings from the NDP that the Conservatives would cut billions of dollars from healthcare. The party also promises a review of government spending, and Rustad says he'll cut what he calls NDP pet projects, such as Clean BC. That program provides grants and subsidies to businesses that reduce their carbon emissions. The term climate change does not appear in the 115-page platform, although the platform does mention climate-resilient farming practices. One protester tried to disrupt Rustad's announcement, which took place on the UBC campus in the riding of Vancouver Point Grey, currently held by NDP leader David Eby.
As of today, we're going to be rising up against the bug-eating communists.
Rustad, however, was unfazed.
You gotta love it, you know. Actually, as we've gone through this campaign, we've had very little bit of protests, and it's nice to see that the NDP have finally woken up a little bit as we approach the final days of the campaign.
The Conservative platform comes as advance polls are already open, with almost 600,000 people casting their ballot. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
For more on what we're learning from the Conservative plan, I'm joined now by UBC economist Sir Somerville. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Saturday is barreling towards us. What do you make of John Rustad's platform?
It's so odd to see Conservatives essentially, planning, higher deficits than you'd see from the NDP. I just can't wrap my head around it. All I can think back to is the sort of Reagan supply side kind of, we'll cut taxes and then cause growth and everything will be magically better kind of world. And I think George Bush refers to that as voodoo economics. So there you go.
Okay, and the Conservative plan, as you kind of alluded to there, includes spending that will bring the provincial deficit up to $11 billion by 2027. But then it also promises to balance that budget in the second term of a Conservative government. So how realistic do you think that promise is?
Well, they seem to be banking on growing the provincial economy at 5.4%, and they claim that the NDP will grow it at 3.1%. To give you an idea, that 5.4% is, north of what TD Bank and RBC predict for any of the provincial economies, including Alberta, that has historically grown faster than we have and has faster population growth. So they're kind of basing this on sort of unprecedented numbers, and I think that goes back to if we just spend a lot of money and cut taxes, then we'll magically get all this growth with no kind of negative effects and everything will be hunky-dory, and that seems wishful.
Yeah, we've now seen all the parties' platforms side by side. So in your view, how do their economic policies compare?
It's hard to figure out some of the spending stuff because there's little bits of money sprinkled everywhere. And so I think I'll focus more on the tax cut side because that's sort of what's really striking. And I think what you're seeing there is that the NDP has a more targeted tax cut, so it comes in at a smaller hit, and the Conservatives are going, with a really large tax cut that would be delivered to sort of more people in a way that really juices the deficit. And I think that's the thing that's really striking, because after that, everyone's promising goodies for everything on the spending side. One thing that neither of them do is really costing out their capital plans. So there's bridges and tunnels for everybody, but those numbers are nowhere to be seen. This is just sort of the operational side of things.
All right, lots to consider before Saturday. Professor, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Be well.
John Rustad also faced questions today about comments made by his candidate in Surrey South. In a social media post from 7 years ago, Brent Chapman questioned whether people were actually killed in the Quebec mosque shooting and the mass killing at Sandy Hook Elementary. CBC News has not independently verified the Facebook post. Rustad called his comments offensive but has not dropped him as a candidate.
Mr. Chapman has come out with clarification in terms of his statements. He has also put in place a lawyer. So it'd be inappropriate for me to comment further. But I tell you something, it's up to the people in British Columbia to make a decision.
Chapman now says the shootings he referenced were, quote, all very real. This latest controversy comes after Chapman apologized for comments he made in 2015, where he referred to Palestinians as inbred. And tune in Saturday for our CBC News Live special, bringing you the results as they happen on election night. We're on the air from 7 o'clock Pacific on CBC television and online. You can stream us on YouTube, TikTok, cbc.ca, and the CBC News app. The founders of a BC Drug Compassion Club have filed a constitutional challenge of their arrests. Last fall, the Drug Users Liberation Front facility was raided by Vancouver police. Today, its operator spoke publicly for the first time. And as Bell Puri reports, the two say their rights and the rights of drug users were violated when the club was shut down.
The different drugs, and the meth is in green bags and the cocaine is in clear bags.
It was a bold initiative, openly selling illicit drugs from an unsanctioned facility. Its operators said they simply wanted to give users a predictable drug supply during a toxic drug crisis.
To be criminalized for that is, heartbreaking and shakes your kind of foundational sense of, right and wrong.
The Drug Users Liberation Front readily admitted it bought heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines from the black market, sent the drugs to labs for testing, then sold them at cost. Last fall, the Compassion Club was raided by Vancouver police.
We have always warned that anyone who violates the Criminal Code or the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act should expect to face enforcement.
The founders were arrested. The club was shut down.
Cutting folks off from a predictable and regulated supply and forcing them to go back to this deregulated, disastrous market, this failure of public public policy. Folks are much more at risk.
Jeremy Calicum and Eris Nix are charged with possession for the purpose of trafficking. Now their lawyers have launched a Charter of Rights challenge,
prohibiting the Compassion Club members from accessing this safer, predictable, known supply of drugs, forces them to obtain their drugs from the unpredictable, toxic street supply.
Last year alone, BC's toxic drug crisis claimed over 2,500 lives.
You cannot recover someone if they have passed away. Someone cannot go to abstinence-based treatment if they are dead.
Without the club, more money goes to the illicit market and organized crime. Without the club, overdoses go up.
A trial for the two is scheduled for next October. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
Members of the pro-Khalistan movement say safety is still a concern as police continue to investigate allegations linking the Indian government to a campaign of violence against Canadians on home soil. Michelle Morton has more.
But we do expect more. Sikhs are expecting more steps to be taken to ensure peace and tranquility in Canada.
Members with the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara and the group Sikhs for Justice are calling for more safety measures. They say they want to see India's consulates shut down in Vancouver and Toronto.
If these consulates are shut down, then the political immunity gets lifted, and that gives an easier path for the RCMP and the Canadian government to make sure that these type of criminal activities are not taking place against Canadian citizens.
On Monday, the RCMP commissioner accused Indian diplomats of having a role in what he called widespread violence, including murders targeting Canadian citizens. Canada then announced it's expelling 6 Indian diplomats. India has denied the RCMP's allegations and retaliated by ordering 6 Canadian diplomats to leave the country within a week.
Agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen.
In September of last year, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canadian intelligence services were investigating a potential link between India's government and the killing of BC Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey. 4 Indian nationals have since been charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy.
Even at that time, what was really positive was that our economic relationship had stayed intact. So our trade was still ongoing. Actually, it increased in 2023. And so I think the impact we are going to see is that this economic relationship might now fracture.
Meanwhile, the head of the RCMP is urging people with knowledge relevant to its investigation to come forward. Michelle Morton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Darius Maravi joins us now with the first look at the weather. So Darius, what's the vibe out there?
It's looking not too bad, Michelle. We've got some precipitation continuing in parts of the province that is not expected to taper off anytime soon. Some more moisture will continue feeding in over the next few days. Tomorrow does look a little bit drier. If we take a look at the forecast here, you can see that precipitation continuing to make its way down the coast. We will see some dry periods again. It's just really showers and flurries into tomorrow, though there is some more excitement coming later in the week. I'll mention that in a second. But again, throughout the day Wednesday, it will also clear up at times here in the Lower Mainland and really across the South Coast. But expect to see, at least a decent amount of precipitation until we get into Thursday, when the island at least looks a lot clearer. Vancouver will probably continue to see that cloud come in and out, as well as the South Island. But it's not until Friday that we start to see a little bit more excitement. So overnight Thursday into Friday, we see a little bit more. You can see here that wave of moisture coming in. It seems more and more likely that we will get an atmospheric river event as we get into Friday. At this point, it's hard to say how severe it will be, but it does seem like western parts of the island may see as much as 200 millimeters of rainfall in 72 hours, which is definitely significant, but nothing too out of the ordinary for this time of year. As for tonight here in Vancouver, expect to see mainly cloudy skies and then continue into a showery morning tomorrow with the possibility of a thunderstorm, which is unusual even for this time of year.
All right, thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Coming up, with just 3 days to go until voting day on Saturday, why has the NDP focused so much of its energy in this election attacking the Conservatives? We'll bring you David Eby's answer when he spoke with the CBC's Stephen Quinn on the early edition. That's next. The BC election is just 4 days away, and each of the main party leaders have been invited to interviews this week on CBC's The Early Edition. Today, Stephen Quinn asked David Eby why so much of the NDP's campaign has been focused on attacking the Conservatives. Here's what he said.
You want people to vote. A vote for the NDP is a vote against John Rustad. Is that the basis of your campaign so far?
No, not at all. The pitch that I'm making is that whether it's affordability related to housing or just cost of daily life, whether it's our healthcare system, or whether it's building a strong and clean economy and strong and safe communities, that the NDP has the best plan, that we're actually turning the corner on some of these major issues. More people with family doctors, rents are finally starting to come down. And now's not the time to go to the cuts, division, conspiracy theories, and hate, frankly, of a number of the Conservative candidates.
Your campaign has been so focused on John Rustad and on that division and on those conspiracy theories and pointing out what candidates have done and said in the past and bringing that up. I mean, rather than telling people what you are going to do for them.
Yeah, I think it's a ballot question. I think it's important for people to know because you don't know all of the things that are going to happen over the 4-year course of a mandate. We didn't know that we were going into a huge global pandemic, and then we didn't know that interest rates were going to go through the roof and that we were going to face global inflation, all these things, climate emergencies, floods, forest fires. So people need to know what the values are of the people they're electing. And so if you're putting forward a candidate that thinks that vaccines cause AIDS or that calls people who are gay groomers or slurs the Muslim community and says they don't have a place at the table, how does that inform how your cabinet will make decisions when you're in government?
Again, but what you've just said has become boilerplate for you through this entire campaign. Instead of, again, you throw in these criticisms of your opponent rather than telling us what you're going to do.
Well, Stephen, I think it's important for people to know who's running. In my own constituency, a guy named Paul Ratchford, on Orange Shirt Day last year, this is the day when we recognized what happened to Indigenous kids at residential schools, posted a tweet that said he wouldn't wear an orange shirt because he wouldn't stand for the misrepresentation of Canada's history. And he went on from there. And so it is important for people in my community when they're marking a ballot to know if they're interested in reconciliation, if they believe climate change is real and an urgent issue, if they care about the diversity of this province and it being a safe place and welcoming for everyone, then the NDP is the place to mark the ballot. This is a serious election around those values questions.
And what about the people who are looking for a job that pays a decent wage, that need to make a living because they have to go rent an apartment that's costing them $2,500 for a one-bedroom apartment? I mean, there are day-to-day, just cost of living issues that are inescapable and that people are looking to government to help with.
Absolutely right. And so our concrete proposals on that are immediate support with the cost of living, with a tax cut for middle-income households, strong action on housing.
This is the $1,000 a year for
the average is
$1,000
for the average household, and you don't have to own a penthouse in downtown Vancouver to benefit fully from it, like John Rustad's long wait program that kicks in 2029. It's immediate. It's for all taxpayers in the province. The first year is actually for people on disability as well.
When rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $2,500, how far does $1,000 go in a year?
Yeah, well, it makes a difference for a lot of families. And also, we need to work on affordable housing. And this is another critical issue. John Rustad's housing plan doesn't add a single new unit of affordable housing, not one. And for people who are interested in driving down the cost of housing, you have to build more rental housing. You have to control the excesses of Airbnb, people buying up whole homes and condos to turn into hotel rooms. You have to address people buying up homes and leaving them vacant through the speculation of vacancy tax. John wants to get rid of all of those things. And I know it is brutal out there for housing right now. It would be so much worse. And our proposal to build 300,000 middle-income homes across the province, that's what experts say our plan, just getting rid of the red tape around building townhomes would do. John wants to get rid of that too.
You can watch that full interview by searching for CBC Vancouver on YouTube. BC Green leader Sonia Furstenau will be on the Early Edition's guest on Thursday. BC Conservative leader John Rustad has yet to respond to our invitation for an interview. This was Burrard Inlet towards North Vancouver today with what felt like very fall weather, mostly overcast skies and temperatures in the mid-teens. Still to come, Darius will have your full BC forecast next. BC's party leaders are focusing closely on Surrey in the last week of the election campaign, with 10 ridings up for grabs in the city. CBC's Katie DeRosa takes a closer look at the new riding of Surrey's Serpentine River and how it could hold the key to unlocking electoral fortunes.
Surrey, the fastest growing community in BC, is getting a new riding in this provincial election, and it could prove to be a bellwether. The NDP and the BC Conservatives are running star candidates here in Surrey Serpentine River. Linda Hepner is running for the BC Conservatives. She spent 2 decades working for the city of Surrey, served 3 terms as a city councillor before winning the mayor's seat in 2014.
Quite frankly, it has 4 significant clusters. We have West Cloverdale, we have East Newton.
Hepner lives just outside the riding in Surrey South, but says her connections here run deep.
What I think I bring to the table is experience in government.
She's running against the NDP's Baltaj Dillon, a retired RCMP inspector who lives in the riding. He was the first Mountie to wear a turban on the job, paving the way for religious accommodation in the National Police Force.
I had to fight racism, I had to fight discrimination and prejudice, both inside and outside. And it was a hard-fought fight, and we're better for it today. As I come into this world to lend some expertise to the work that's already underway around public safety. And so this is a party that I could stand with. My values align, so do my principles.
Also running is independent candidate Jim McMurdy. Surrey Serpentine River is made up of 3 previous ridings. They include some areas where the NDP did well in 2020 and parts that have historically favored a centre-right party. Data compiled by SFU researcher Andy Yan shows 48% of those living here are South Asian. Nearly 3/4 are homeowners, a higher proportion than the province overall. And there is a large number of families with children. The big issues here are healthcare, affordability, and public safety, especially as divisions continue over the province's decision to force Surrey to stick with the city police force.
Healthcare, housing, I know for my kids, they need to be able to afford a house one day. I think I've made up my mind already that we need change.
I think about the most of the things that is getting very expensive these days, especially the groceries and the housing prices.
Linda Hepner argues Surrey has been neglected, pointing to the number of school portables that have ballooned since 2017 when the NDP came to power.
You cannot double portables and not say you're failing. You're failing. I think that Surrey has been a second-class citizen for far too long.
Baltaj Dillon says Surrey was neglected under the former BC Liberal government. He praises the NDP for building schools and a new hospital tower.
We're trying to work from that neglect forward. If anything, the BC NDP has corrected that course and are doing all the things that they made promises around.
With 10 ridings up for grabs in Surrey, both David Eby and John Rustad have been making frequent campaign stops here, with a particular focus on Surrey Serpentine River. As the NDP and BC Conservatives remain in a tight race ahead of voting day, October 19th, candidates will be busy knocking on doors and hitting the streets to try and sway undecided voters. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Surrey.
Younger voters could make a big impact on the BC election. That's once again just 4 days away. But their strength in numbers will only count if they fill out a ballot. Yvette Brent has more on what may drive them to have their say.
Less than a week from Election Day and the biggest voting bloc, young people have the potential to turn BC politics on its head. The leaders are taking notice.
People are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 2 youth can't see a future by staying in British Columbia.
Conservative leader John Rustad appealing to the frustration among young people, and his message resonated with some.
It's like that stat that Rustad mentioned, like 1 of 2 youth is like thinking of getting the hell out of here.
Is that you?
Because, yeah, I'd say it's a thought that's come to my mind. So definitely it's like, why would you work in a place where you can make this much and the cost is this much?
Youth are a tricky one. There's rare elections, even around the world, where youth have transformed and made an election different than what it could have been.
Rising costs, especially related to housing, are a major factor, says this pollster.
It's affordability. They can't afford to pay the rent. So, you know, the 28-year-olds are living in their parents' basements. because they can't afford a place. Their wages don't support that.
And while young people have historically voted more progressively, he says in this tight race, more than a third of people aged 18 to 35 are leaning to the right.
There just seemed to be a movement afoot across the country and in BC towards the right. And that trend's been entrenched for a couple of years now.
Many feel failed by current leaders.
Younger generations in the past, when they're in university or at that stage of life formation, there'd always been a greater sense of hope.
We've had the NDP in government for a while, and perhaps they're not seeing the change that they expected.
This 19-year-old political science student says there's a hunger for change, but options are limited.
Because I feel like now there's just like two choices. It's very polarized.
Pollsters stress to swing this election, young voters would need to turn out in larger numbers than usual. Yvette Brand, CBC News, Vancouver.
Okay, we just heard from some young voters in this province on how the cost of living here is playing into how they're thinking of voting in this election. And joining me now is UBC policy professor and founder of Generation Squeeze, Paul Kershaw. Generation Squeeze advocates for policy changes for a better future for younger generations. So, Paul, when you compare these party platforms, which party is talking about those kinds of policies that might be appealing to young people?
Well, all three parties are definitely talking about the challenges facing younger people and offering solutions. And so it's really critical that young folks turn up and cast their ballot, because one thing we all know is that politics responds to those who organize and show up. And the more that younger folks show up, the better platforms will be in the future.
We know the importance of people organizing, people showing up, as you were just alluding to. But do you get the sense that those promises could actually change how young people might vote? Are young people excited about going to the polls this election?
BC is a challenging province for younger folks, and it's not a new situation. This is a place where home prices have left earnings behind for more than other provinces in most cases, and for many, many years now. It's not a new problem. But I think that as young folks are trying to figure out how to cast their vote, here are some things to keep in mind. Let me start with the Conservative Party. They're most likely to have heard about something called the Rustad rebate, and it sounds so good that maybe you could save $3,000 of rent a month from your income taxes. But the fine print really matters here. In starting 2026, you would save about $900, and eventually you might save as much as $1,800 a year. And I'll leave it to your listeners to decide, is that really going to fix the housing situation? The other key piece on housing from the Conservatives is that they really want to get new units built more quickly. They want the permitting process to happen faster. But interestingly, the Conservatives want to repeal the very legislation that the incumbent government put in place recently to allow more units to get built right away by upzoning, adding more density in our neighborhoods. So there's an inconsistency there. On the NDP front, the housing situation, on the one hand, is, hey, they're the incumbent government. I'm mad at that. And that's understandable. At the same time, it's hard for me as a professor not to say a number of important changes have been made in recent months. I would encourage the voters to think about, wow, this changes to municipal zoning that the province has required is really important. So is trying to reserve housing for homes and not for vacationers, as is trying to discourage things like speculation and home flipping. And on the Greens, if you're interested in housing, I think the really critical thing to pay attention there is two things. One, the Greens are especially aggressive at proposing to invest in more non-market housing. And at the same time, they're more likely to ask homeowners like me, I've been a homeowner for 20 years, who've gained a lot of wealth in our homes, to consider contributing a little bit more in taxation so we can invest in more deeply affordable housing for younger folks. So I think that's how the three parties are playing out on this key housing issue when it comes to cost of living.
Okay, we have about 30 seconds left, but Rustad has talked over and over again about people leaving BC because of NDP policies and because of the cost of living. Do you get a sense that young people are actually leaving this province or thinking of leaving this province because of how expensive it is?
Oh, let's be clear. People were leaving under previous governments well before the NDP came into power. So that's not a new thing. We need to be careful about how we contextualize it. We should be worried that younger folks are thinking about leaving. And I would say to Mr. Rustad on that point, thank you for drawing our attention to it. But I'm a little bit worried that Mr. Rustad is, in his costed platform, just out today, breaking news, is proposing that we're going to have our BC economy grow at rates that we haven't seen really in the last 30 years. And so there's a bit of wishful thinking in the plan put forward today by the Conservative Party. And if that's their plan to attract younger folks to stay with a bit of wishful thinking, I'm a bit nervous on that front, because we need to anchor our proposals in realistic expectations for where economic growth is going to be.
All right, Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Have a great evening.
BC NDP leader David Eby says that if he's elected, the NDP will partner with the city of Port Coquitlam to fund a $3 million build to cover a multi-sport facility in the city.
I'm running against a guy who says we don't have the capacity to build infrastructure like this in the province of BC, and I just disagree. We absolutely must deliver infrastructure like this for British Columbians to support families, to support kids, and to build strong communities.
Eby said the facility would be available every day of the year for sports like basketball, badminton, pickleball, and lacrosse. Each of the main party leaders have been invited to take your calls on BC Today. Here's some of what callers told BC Green leader Sonia Furstenau earlier.
My question for us in Prince Rupert and in the North in general is we don't have a Green candidate. And it's pretty disappointing because our voices aren't heard.
What needs to happen for the Green Party to gain enough support and legitimacy so that they can be a real viable alternative to the Conservatives and NDP in BC?
One of the challenges of breaking into a two-party system is breaking into all of the structures around that two-party system. And we see, in terms of media attention, in terms of how much space we get in the House, it's challenging. And if you take the last election, we had 16% of the vote, but we only had 2% of the seats in the House.
Tensions in the Middle East are flaring as Hezbollah threatens to launch broader attacks and Israel increases its airstrikes deep into Lebanon. We'll have that story next. The fighting and the rhetoric are escalating in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is now threatening to launch broader attacks as Israel increases its airstrikes against the militant group. At the same time, Israel is coming under increasing international pressure to ensure the safety of UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, while the U.S. is stepping in to bolster Israel's defenses. CBC's Crystal Gumansing has the latest.
Israel's air defense system is about to get even stronger. Some personnel and initial components of the U.S.'s high-altitude area defense system, also known as THAAD, is now in the country. Now, U.S. officials are just saying that it will be operational soon. They're not giving an exact timeline, citing operational security. Now, we can't say if that's any indication as to when Israel might launch its response against Iran for the October 1st barrage that saw more than 181 ballistic missiles fired at Israel. We did hear from Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, saying that it will launch that response soon and that, quote, it will be precise and deadly. There is wide support for Israel's right to respond and to defend itself. However, Israel is coming under strong criticism for actions in Lebanon, particularly involving UN peacekeepers along the Blue Line. That's the dividing line between Israel and Lebanon. Over the past several days, at least 5 UN peacekeepers have been injured. We have heard from a number of officials saying that those attacks in some cases were deliberate. That is being absolutely denied by the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
The charge that Israel deliberately attacked UNIFIL personnel is completely false. It's exactly the opposite. Israel repeatedly asked UNIFIL to get out of harm's way. It repeatedly asked them to temporarily leave the combat zone, which is right next to Israel's border with Lebanon. In fact, on the day that Israel began its ground operation next to our border with Lebanon, we asked them specifically, please leave this area so you're not harmed.
Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says she will be visiting Lebanon looking for security guarantees for those peacekeepers. There are about 1,000 Italian peacekeepers that are involved in that operation. Now, despite Netanyahu calling for them to be pulled back, removed for their own safety, the UN's chief of peacekeepers says that will not happen. They will stay in position. And the UN Security Council says all 15 members are unanimous in strongly condemning the attacks involving UN peacekeepers, saying their security and protection must be upheld. Crystal Gumansing, CBC News, Jerusalem.
The Canadian government has designated the group Samidoun as a terrorist entity. It's also known as the Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. The government says the group has close links with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is already listed as a terrorist entity in Canada, the US, and the EU.
Samidoun is now going to have a very difficult time getting access to any kind of banking or financial services in Canada. There is going to be no one who's going to want to do business with that organization. Legally, they cannot. And certainly with the organizers, banks will take a very conservative risk approach in terms of providing them with financial services like bank accounts, credit cards, and those kinds of things.
Samidoun made headlines for a rally they hosted in Vancouver on the anniversary of the October 7th attacks by Hamas. Unidentified people at the Vancouver Art Gallery were heard chanting "Death to Canada, death to the United States, and death to Israel," while some in the group burned Canadian flags. Canada's annual inflation rate dropped by more than expected last month to 1.6%. A big drop in the price of gasoline pushed down the inflation rate in September. Other than gas, inflation remained at 2.2%. Because inflation dropped overall, forecasters now say the Bank of Canada could reduce its key interest rate by 50 basis points next week. The last 3 cuts by the Bank of Canada were 25 basis points each. Another Liberal MP is calling for Justin Trudeau to step down as Liberal leader. 2 MPs from Eastern Canada have already called on Trudeau to resign, and now Sean Casey from PEI has publicly joined them.
My job has always been to project the voice of the people I represent in Ottawa, to be Charlottetown's representative in Ottawa and not the reverse. And the message that I've been getting loud and clear and more strongly as time goes by is that it's time for him to go. And I agree.
Sean Casey speaking to the CBC's David Cochrane on power and politics. Casey says there are other Liberal MPs who also want Trudeau to resign, but they have yet to speak on the record. Well, voters in the U.S. are 3 weeks away from Election Day, and that's bringing up memories of upheaval around the last U.S. election and the assault on the Capitol on January 6th. That day, one of our own reporters, Katie Nicholson, was swarmed by Trump supporters. Now, nearly 4 years later, she's tracked down one of them.
Whether or not. So that's me on January 6, 2021. After that group of Trump supporters swarmed us that day and the network had to cut away, I've wondered who they were and what their thinking is now, especially now heading into another U.S. election. So I tracked one of them down.
Her name is Tracy Danka, and she invited me to her home in Calabash, North Carolina. Turns out she still believes the 2020 election was stolen, despite more than 60 unsuccessful court challenges. And Trump's own election officials saying it was the most secure election in U.S. history.
You still have doubt?
Yeah, I still have doubt.
That may not be that surprising. A MAGA supporter believing Donald Trump's big lie about a stolen election. But what was surprising was that among her Trump flags, she had a Harris Walls banner on her front lawn.
Well, let me tell you, the only reason why there's a Harris is because I ordered that for my husband.
That's right. Her husband of 26 years, Ed, is a Democrat, and they don't see eye to eye on January 6th.
For me, it was a show of support, patriotism, love.
That was an actual live broadcast, and I know what I saw. I saw people breaking into the Capitol building, attacking officers.
Tracy said she didn't go inside the Capitol. Both were upset by the violence that day. And while they're miles apart on what happened on January 6th, they both share fears about what could happen after this election.
There's going to be trouble, either way, whether he wins or loses.
Before I left, I showed Tracy that moment where our paths first crossed.
No, nobody should attack anyone for doing their job, for, speaking their mind, for reporting the news. So, yeah, I would say I was wrong.
As for Tracy and Ed, they may be on two sides of a political divide, but they say their marriage is solid.
Family comes first, and then politics. All we can do is vote for who we think needs to be in that job and hope for the best. And may the better man or woman win.
The question is how long that will take and what happens after a winner is declared. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
Darius Madavi is back now for our 5-day forecast. And Darius, I know it's getting colder out there because you have the sweater blazer combo going today.
Yes, isn't it nice? I'm, if anything, a little bit too warm in the studio, but I would be perfect outside because it is definitely cooling off. We've got some moisture on the way. It seems more and more likely that we're going to get an atmospheric river to cap off this week and into the weekend. And temperatures are definitely coming down. Those freezing levels are falling, expected to be in some places close to just 1,000 meters by Thursday this week. So definitely cooling off. You can see the atmospheric river likely to come in now. This is just model data, but it is seeming like there's higher and higher confidence that that will happen. If we take a look at our province-wide precipitation forecast, you can more or less see that play out. Just some showers, some flurries at those mountain tops and up in the northwest over the next 24, 48 hours or so. But then we see that next big wave of precipitation come in from the west, spread across, and we're going to see pretty much right through probably midday Friday, maybe even earlier than that, maybe early morning Friday, see that precipitation stick around for the lower mainland right through the weekend, more or less. So it's definitely going to be a wet one. Expect to see a lot of moisture feed in. We should start to dry off a little bit by late Sunday, and then some showers sort of overnight Sunday. But yes, any activities this weekend outside, expect them to be a little bit wet. In terms of those lows, as I mentioned, those are also falling as we get into tomorrow. You can see the central interior dropping down to -2, so those freezing levels also coming down over the next few days. In terms of our highs, those are also cooling off a little bit, not quite as much of a dramatic drop as the lows, but we're definitely going to be feeling a little bit below seasonal through this week, especially especially if you are in the interior where things are falling quite a bit more, especially in the central interior. But, a few degrees below seasonal here on the coast, maybe just, a couple here on the coast, a few degrees in the interior. In terms of conditions tomorrow, we do have a risk of thunderstorms from the central interior down through the southern interior. We also have a risk of a thunderstorm for the west coast of the island, up on parts of the coast that are closer to the water, not Terrace and Bella Coola, but, Bella Bella, Prince Rupert, Haida Gwaii, thunderstorms there, and even a risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow morning and potentially returning in the evening and overnight. No, not overnight, just the evening, here in Vancouver. You can see that here, potentially stormy in the morning, some showers also coming in the morning. It looks like we will dry off into the afternoon. We'll clear up a little bit more, but then that risk of a thunderstorm returns into those night hours. On Thursday, we have a little bit more sunshine, but then some showers are possible. And as we head into the rest of the week, expect to see that rain come in and out and a decent amount of cloud.
All right, we know you love thunderstorms, so you're not too sad about that.
No, not too sad at all.
Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Still to come, weighed over 2.5 pounds and was the size of his head. We'll tell you about the man who found a mega mushroom in Lumby. That's next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox. CBC is the exclusive media partner of the Jade Music Festival, November 6th to the 9th. The festival's inspiring lineup showcases the growth and diversity of the Chinese language music community. And British Columbians are heading to the polls on October 19th, and CBC has you covered with up-to-the-minute election news on all platforms. Tune in to CBC for the live coverage at 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time.
Imagine foraging for mushrooms in BC's interior and finding one that's almost as big as your head.
Wow, well that's what happened to a mushroom picker from Lumby when he unearthed what could be one of the biggest matsuke mushrooms.
Take a look.
Taking a video?
Yeah. We're out picking pine matsutake, and we got into this creek bed.
Dude, I swear, it's like a button. It's crazy. What?
And I think it was just the perfect conditions because I saw the little bit of white from this mushroom and pulled back the ground. These mushrooms, they grow underground, so they're a little hard to spot. And this one was just huge.
Oh, dude, that's crazy. That's bigger than your head almost.
I could tell as soon as I started digging it, like, this is a real prize mushroom here. I've never seen anything like it, and everyone I talked to at the camp had never seen anything like it, and I couldn't even wrap both hands around the base of it. That's how big it was.
2.6 pounds.
Wow. And it weighed 2.57 pounds, which is just absolutely massive. I've heard stories of some giant matsutake that'll get sent to auction and sell for thousands of dollars in Japan. This one I didn't end up selling. I decided to just take it home and we're gonna make some miso soup with it, make some ramen, probably grill it up. We're gonna eat it, do something cool with it.
What?
Darius, you should take up foraging.
You're right, I should. That would be really fun.
Yeah.
I feel like cooking would be way more rewarding if I foraged instead of went to the grocery store.
Well, go for it.
I will try. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
I'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock right after the National. Have a great night.